Hi, today we're going to be talking about Chapter 4 that is all about the integumentary system. So, integument, also known as skin, is going to be the largest organ of the body. It's going to account for about 16% of our body weight. It functions as a first line of defense against the environment, and it's also going to help the body to maintain homeostasis. It's going to provide a physical barrier that's going to protect against infection, extreme temperatures, and UV radiation. It's also going to act as a sensory organ. It can help you maintain your fluid balance, and it will synthesize vitamin D for the body. It is a combination of all four tissue types. Within the skin, we see epithelial tissue, which if you remember is the outer superficial layers of skin. We also see connective tissue, which is going to be seen in our dermis and hypodermis. We see smooth muscle in those hair follicles. And we also have nervous tissue because we have sensory receptors running all through our skin, right? That's how we get these sensations of pain sometimes that we get. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about integumentary structures. So the skin is going to have three major layers that we're going to talk about. The epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. You will also hear the hypodermis referred to as the subcutaneous layer. Remember, sub means under, cutaneous means skin. We're also going to talk about some accessory organs. So this is going to be things like hair, nails, sweat glands, oil glands. We aren't going to talk about hooves and feathers and scales for the sake of this class because we're just focusing on human anatomy, but those are some more accessory organs that we see in the animal kingdom. So let's talk about layers of the skin. First, we're going to talk about the epidermis. So this is going to be the outermost layer of skin. It is going to be about 0.05 millimeters to 1.5 millimeters thick. It is made of epithelial tissue. The purpose of this layer is to be the waterproof barrier, and this is for protection. Very important takeaway here is that the epidermis is avascular. That means it has no blood vessels. So all of the nutrients in the epidermis are going to be acquired by diffusion up from the layers beneath it. If you remember our last lecture, we talked a whole lot about diffusion. This layer of skin is going to be completely replaced every 4 to 6 weeks. We're going to have 5 epidermal layers. We will have the stratum corneum. That's going to be about 20 to 30 sheets of dead keratinized skin cells. Then we will have a stratum lucidum. That is a clear layer found only in the thick skin on the palms and the soles of the feet. Then we will have the stratum granulosum. These are the living keratinocytes. So our living cells that begin to fill with keratin and protein, and eventually as they move on up will die off. We also have the stratum spineosum. That is where mitosis of the skin cells is going to occur. And we'll have the stratum basal. And that is going to be a single layer of columnar skin cells. And this is where we are going to produce our new cells, our melanocytes, our Langerhans cells, which are immune cells, and where our touch receptors, also called Merkel cells, are going to live. This is also what's going to connect the epidermis to the dermis below. So the stratum basal is a very, very busy layer. Sorry, I'm getting a little tongue-tied tonight for some reason. So the epidermis can be thin or thick. We talked a little bit about that when we talked about the stratum lucidum. So thick skin is only going to be on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. It is hairless, and it's going to have all 5 layers. The thin skin is going to be everywhere else. It's only going to have 4 layers, but it will have hair. Okay, so the way that the skin works, as these top cells slough off, more cells move up from the bottom and then take their place. So this process is always happening. So cells can take about 7 to 10 days for the cells in the stratum basal, which remember is our lowest layer, to move up to the stratum corneum. Once there, they're going to remain for about 2 weeks before we shed them off. Shed cells are going to be a major component of dust And also a very important vocabulary word that's going to come in really handy throughout the rest of this unit is keratin. Keratin is going to be a durable, water-resistant protein. It's going to be found in skin, hair, and nails, and we're going to see so much of it throughout the system. So the next layer of skin that we're going to come to is going to be the dermis. It has a whole lot of functions. This layer is going to be responsible for sweating, sensory perception, and circulation of blood. This is going to make up about 90% of the skin thickness. So we are looking at all the way from here all the way down to here. It's mostly made up of connective tissue. It is strong and elastic. It is because it has that extracellular matrix made of collagen and elastin proteins. It's going to have two different really distinct and important layers. It's going to have the papillary layer, which is going to be the superficial layer. This is going to provide nutrients to the epidermis, and this is what is going to make your fingerprint ridges. So you can see this little thin pink layer that's very, very wavy right at the top. That's the papillary layer, and we also have a reticular layer. The reticular layer is the deep layer. It's going to be 80% of the dermis. So this is going to be the really light pink here where you see the nerves and the hairs, sweat glands, and all of those things running through it. This is also where we are going to find the blood vessels. Because this part is vascularized, right? This is where the blood is released before it diffuses up to that epidermal layer. So let's talk a little bit more about fingerprints. These are made by those dermal papillae, and these again are in the papillary layer. This is going to give the dermis ridges, which is why fingerprints look the way that they do, and why if you slough off just the top layer of skin, you don't lose your fingerprints. Let's talk about the hypodermis, which is our lowest layer of skin. This literally means below the dermis. It is also called the subcutaneous tissue because it is underneath the skin. Its purpose is to provide insulation, shock absorption, and to have an energy reserve. So all of that yellow adipose tissue, remember that is our stored fat reserve. So that is how our body stores energy. It's going to be made up of about 50% adipose or fat and 50% other connective tissues. This layer is highly vascular. You can see all of the arteries and veins running through it. This is why we can give subcutaneous injections. So when we're doing things like insulin and things like that, it's going into this layer. Let's talk a little bit about those sensory and accessory organs that we keep seeing all throughout this layer. So sensory receptors, these are going to be the ends of nerves that branch from deeper tissue up into the dermis and parts of the epidermis. These are going to pick up sensory information and relay it back to the brain and spinal cord so that we can then have a response. Notice over here in this little picture that there are various types of nerve endings, all with different structures. This is because they all have slightly different functions. Some are going to pick up on light touch, some pick up on pressure, some pick up on pain, some pick up on tension, some pick up on vibration. So we will have different sensory receptors that are all going to pick up different kinds of sensory sensations. I think that's really cool. Another skin appendage is going to be hair. So hair is a protein filament made of keratinized epithelial cells. So what this means is that they are dead cells filled up with that keratin protein. These are going to be produced in tube-like structures called hair follicles, which originate in the dermis. So you can see the hair shaft there, and then you can see the hair follicle going all the way around it. Let's talk a little bit about how goosebumps work, because this is really fun. You will see these little small muscles associated with hair follicles. So anytime you see a hair follicle, then you will see these little muscles right to the side of it. We call those erector pili muscles, and these actually are what cause our hair to like stand up on end whenever we are having goosebumps or we're scared of something or something like that. So another skin appendage is nails. These are going to be our protective coverings over the ends of fingers and toes. We have at the very, very end, have you ever noticed this little white spot at the end of your nail closest to your nail beds? that is a laluna, which is a half moon shaped base. This is where the active growth occurs in the nail. So as new cells are produced, older ones are pushed outward and become keratinized, just like the other parts of the skin. So unlike hair, no pigment is going to be produced in nails. Nails are all going to look the same. We also have glands in our skin. We have several different types of glands. The first ones we're going to talk about are sebaceous glands. Our sebaceous glands are our oil glands. They produce what's called sebum. Sebum is just a fancy medical word for the kind of oil that's produced that helps lubricate our skin. This helps with waterproofing, and it also has antibacterial properties, so it helps keep us safe in that respect. It is going to be highly active during puberty. This is why our hair gets really, really greasy during puberty, and it is found inside of hair follicles. So acne, whenever we get acne, this is going to be a formation of pimples due to blockage in these sebaceous oil glands. This is going to cause inflammation, pain, and infection. So that is how those work. So if you're asked what kind of gland acne is associated with, you would know it was a sebaceous gland, because those are. We are also going to have sweat glands or pseudoiferous glands. These are primarily involved in temperature regulation through evaporation. We call this evaporative cooling. We will have eccrine glands. These are going to be in pores. These are the main type of sweat gland, and these are going to produce mostly water. We also can have apocrine glands. These are going to be in hair follicles. These produce a kind of nutrient-rich source of bacterial growth. So these are going to be stinky. So these are going to be like your glands that cause BO. We also have the mammary glands. These are modified glands that secrete milk. And we are also going to have cerumeous glands. These are modified glands that are going to secrete earwax. Okay, let's talk a little bit about skin color. So human skin, hair, and eye color is going to be variable, based on both genetics and environmental factors. So melanin is going to be the pigment produced by cells that are within our skin called melanocytes. And the color can range from like a yellowish red to a brown or black. This is important for protecting our cells from UV radiation and kind of acts as a natural sunscreen. So the way that this works is the amount of melanin your melanocytes produce is going to determine the overall tone of the cells in your epidermis. You're going to have a baseline of melanin that your melanocytes produce. This is going to be primarily determined by your genes. And then increased exposure to UV radiation will signal those melanocytes in your epidermis to make more melanin to try to protect you. So that is like how we get a tan outside. So ultraviolet light, we don't want a lot of it, but it is actually needed in moderate doses to help the body produce vitamin D. Vitamin D is needed to help the body absorb nutrients like calcium and phosphorus. It's really important for bone development and immune system function. So not enough vitamin D can cause growth problems, irritability, muscle weakness, and all kinds of bone pain. So we don't want a whole lot of UV light, but we do need it for the homeostasis of the body. So here's some other factors that can influence skin tone. Keratin is going to be a pigment found in skin that comes from certain plants in our diet. The color is going to range from orange to yellow. We're also going to have hemoglobin. So hemoglobin attaches oxygen to your red blood cells. So the red coloring from blood that is in and beneath the skin is going to come from that hemoglobin. We can also have connective tissue that can influence our skin tone. So blue-green light cannot penetrate through the connective tissue in our skin, and it is instead reflected back out. That's why veins are going to appear blue, green, purple, colors like that through our skin. And we can also have bilirubin buildup. We really don't want this to happen, but if you have like liver damage or liver failure, it can cause a buildup of the yellow substance bilirubin in the skin. This is why when you see people with very advanced liver failure, they will have a yellowish tint to their skin and eyes. So one of the most important functions of the skin is to maintain homeostasis. Roughly 5% of our blood volume is going to be found in the skin. So when we are cold, also referred to as hypothermia, blood vessels in the dermis are going to constrict. We call this vasoconstriction, to force blood deeper into the tissues and the core of the body. That is because if we're freezing to death, we would prefer that we get to keep all of the things all the time. But if we're going to freeze to death, our body will sacrifice our arms and legs and appendages that we don't need as much to pull all of that blood into the vital organs and our brain and places like that that are in the core. During this time, if we are in hypothermia, our sweat glands also inactivate because we don't want to be doing any of that evaporative cooling if we're already way too cold. So when we get way too hot or have hyperthermia, blood vessels are going to expand. We call this vasodilation. This happens to bring blood closer to the surface for cooling, and this is when those sweat glands activate so that we can do that evaporative cooling. So here are some signs of loss of homeostasis. We call when our skin looks blue, our skin, our eyes, or nail beds, this can indicate poor circulation or poor respiratory tissues because we're not getting that hemoglobin. We refer to this as cyanosis. We can also have jaundice, which is that yellow skin or nails that we were talking about earlier that's associated with liver disorder. And we can also have erythema. Erythema is when the skin gets really red. This can indicate a fever, inflammation, an allergy, or an infection. So let's talk a little bit about a few different types of skin damages, diseases, disorders, things like this that can happen when stuff goes a little bit wrong with the skin. The first thing we're going to talk about is skin cancer. So cancer is an abnormal growth of cells that's going to be caused by uncontrolled cell division or mitosis. There's going to be a few different ways that we're going to classify tumors. We will classify them as being benign, which means not cancerous. The cells are going to grow abnormally, but they're not going to spread. And we also have malignant cancers. Malignant cancers metastasizes. That means it moves to other parts of the body. So you have the uncontrolled growth, the cells are growing abnormally, and then those cells are moving to other parts of the body. Skin cancer is going to be in the top 10 most common types of cancer. This is primarily because the sun is a little bit inescapable. So let's talk about a few different kinds. So first we'll talk about basal cell carcinoma. This is going to be the most common type of cancer. It is the least malignant. So it tends to stay wherever it grows. And it is going to arise in that stratum basal layer of the epidermis. We can also have squamous cell carcinoma. This can metastasize to lymph nodes if it doesn't get removed. Early removal is going to give a really good chance of remission and being cured. This is sun-induced, so it is seen most often in places on the body that get the most sun. This is going to happen in the stratum spinosum layer of the epidermis. We can also have malignant melanoma. This is the most deadly type of skin cancer. It metastasizes really rapidly to lymph and blood, and then it spreads all throughout the body. So early removal is really, really important. This is a cancer of the melanocytes. Remember, those are those cells that give us our skin color. We're going to detect malignant melanoma and diagnose it by using the ABCDE rule. So a diagnosis of malignant melanoma can be super distressing, but early detection, like with most cancers, is going to be key to effective treatment. So here are the things that we look for on the ABCDE checklist. A stands for asymmetry. We want to look for moles that look asymmetrical in appearance. If you draw a line through the middle of it, the two halves do not look the same. We want to look at the border. We want to see if it's uneven, scalloped, jagged, or has notched borders. We want to look at the color. Usually a mole with more than one color is concerning. We want to look at the diameter of the mole. Usually if the mole is larger than a pencil eraser, then that's a cause for concern, and we want to look at that. And then we want to look at the evolution of the mole. So that means, are they suddenly changing in size, shape, color, elevation, crusting, itching, or any other traits? Did this used to be a mole that wasn't a problem and now it suddenly is a problem? So let's talk a little bit about wounds. And next we're going to talk about wounds and burns. So these are going to be different types of injuries to the skin and the deeper tissues. This can be caused by physical trauma, heat, chemicals, electricity, or radiation. Okay, so we're going to talk about burns first. You all have probably heard of like first, second, third degree burns. We're going to talk a little bit about what that classification process looks like. So with first degree burns, that is going to result in only the epidermis being burned. It's going to be red, painful, and have pretty swollen skin. For second degree burns, this is going to include the epidermis and the upper dermal layer. This is going to be red, it's going to be extremely painful, and this is where we start to see blisters. For third degree burns, these are going to be burns through the entire dermis and moving into the hypodermis. The burn is going to be gray or white or sometimes even like a charred black. These may seem a little bit waxy or leathery. The actual area of the burn can be painless, but the area around it will probably hurt. And the reason for that is because the sensory receptors that would sense that pain have actually been burned away. So the third degree is going to be absolutely our most severe type of burn. So if you were asked a question about assessment and triage and which patient you would bring in first, you would always bring in that third degree burn and then the second degree and then the first degree because they're less severe. So how do we determine the extent of burns? When we're talking about a percentage of the body being burned, we use what's called the rule of nines. And in this, the body is divided into 11 areas, and each area is considered about 9% of the overall body. So critical burns are going to be also classified according to how much skin is burned. So over 25% of the skin being burned is going to be second degree, and over 10% is going to be classified as third degree. Third degree can also be if there are burns to the face, hands, or feet, because those are such vital areas that we use all the time. So let's talk a little bit about the risk and complications associated with burns. Why are they such a big deal? So burns can cause a systemic response. If a large area of the body is burned, like especially 25% or more, or an area like the face, hands, or genitals, it can lead to shock and a loss of homeostasis within the whole body. Both burns and wounds can have various complications associated with them, such as infection, like bacterial, viral, fungal, or other infections. Major infections such as tetanus or necrotizing fasciitis can occur. We can also get hematomas, which are collections of blood outside of the blood vessels, but within the skin. And we can also have abscesses, which are going to be little trapped pockets of pus. So those are all reasons why burns can be a real problem. We can also get maceration. This is whenever we get an excess fluid built up or moisture around a wound is going to cause the tissue to become loose and weak and slow healing. We can also get tissue necrosis, which is death of that tissue that is surrounding the wound. And we can get dehiscence. This is when the wound actually splits, opens, and ruptures. We can also get edema and serotonin. So this is when we're going to have fluid build up within or around the wound, causing more. We talked a little bit last lecture about how tissues heal themselves. So just a little review on that. We have regeneration, which is replacement of the destroyed tissue by the same kind of cells, or fibrosis, which is going to be replacement of the destroyed tissue by a different type of cells, which is usually dense fibrous connective tissue. Remember, this is what results in scars. So just a little review. So whenever we have a wound, we are going to activate what's called the inflammatory cascade. And although this helps the wound to heal faster and more efficiently, this is usually what causes us a whole lot of the pain that we have whenever a wound is healing. So some of the things that we're going to see when a wound is healing, we're going to see a little bit of redness. This is from vasodilation because we have more blood in the area. We'll sometimes get a little bit of heat. This is because of the large amount of blood accumulated in the area and as a byproduct of the increased metabolic activity in the tissue. We also sometimes will see swelling, which is due to the increased permeability of those blood vessels that are leaking blood fluids into those tissue spaces, causing edema or swelling. And we also will see pain, and this is due to injury to the neurons and increased pressure from that edema. So let's talk a little bit about the stages of healing. So the first stage, we're going to see hemostasis, which is also called a blood stop. In this, the damaged blood vessels are going to begin clotting, and they're going to try to form like a little platelet plug to cover off that wound. After this, we're going to see inflammation. So the area is going to swell with fluid to help prevent infection and aid in scab formation. White blood cells are going to try to clean that wound of pathogens. This is what causes pus. After this, we're going to have the granulation or proliferation phase. So this is when you get the delicate little pink granulation tissue that forms. So this is like your early scab, right? This is going to be made of proteins. And at this point, the clot is going to be broken down. In the maturation and remodeling phase, a mixture of regeneration and fibrosis is going to help to fully close the wound, and then after that, the scab is going to fall off. So, a little quick review of a few different skin disorders that you might see. Athlete's foot, this is going to be caused by a fungal infection. It will be itchy, it will be red, you will see the skin peeling between the toes. You can also see boils and carbuncles. These are going to be caused by inflammation of hair follicles. Carbuncles are going to be clusters of boils caused by bacteria. We sometimes see cold sores or fever blisters. These are going to be caused by herpes virus 1. These blisters sometimes can itch and sting. We can also see contact dermatitis. This is going to be caused by exposure to chemicals that provoke allergic responses. With this, we'll see itching, redness, and swelling of the skin. We also sometimes, especially in little kids, see impetigo. This is caused by a bacterial infection. This is when we're going to get pink, fluid-filled raised lesions around the mouth and nose. And lastly, our book talks about psoriasis. This can be triggered by trauma, infection, hormonal changes, or sometimes stress. This is going to cause red epidermal lesions that are going to be covered with like dry silvery scales. Not all of these are contagious, like psoriasis isn't contagious. And then some of them are a little more contagious, like things like athlete's foot and impetigo. So anyway, that is all that I have for this integumentary system lecture. As always, if you have any questions or anything at all, please reach out to me and we will figure it out. Thanks.